At first, it looked like kindness. That was the easiest explanation, the most socially comfortable one. If a conversation slowed, they spoke. If a room grew quiet, they offered something small, an observation, a joke, a question that didn't require much thought to answer. Nothing intrusive, nothing dramatic, just enough sound to keep the air moving. People appreciated it, usually without thinking about why, because silence, especially shared silence, has a way of making people aware of themselves. And awareness in social settings is not always a comfortable feeling. The person who filled the silence made that feeling disappear, or at least soften. They didn't do it consciously. It wasn't a strategy. They weren't performing in the way someone performs when they want attention. In fact, if anything, they were trying to avoid attention, specifically the attention that comes when a room becomes quiet enough for people to notice who is present and how they are being perceived. So when the lull arrived, they spoke. Not loudly, not insistently, just reliably. It happened at dinners. You could almost measure the pattern. Conversation would move easily at first, the usual exchanges about work, weather, small frustrations that were safe enough to share without risk. Then plates would empty, someone would take a sip of water, another person would glance down at their fork. The rhythm would loosen, and just before the quiet settled fully into the room, the silence filler would speak. Did anyone see the rain earlier? Or, I walked past the old bakery today. They're renovating it. Small things, harmless things. Things that asked very little of the listener except acknowledgement. And the room would respond, relieved. People rarely notice this relief directly. Relief from silence is one of those feelings that hides itself quickly once the noise returns. But it was there. You could see it in the way shoulders loosened slightly, in a way someone else would quickly add a follow-up comment, as if helping carry something that had just been lifted. Conversation would resume. The room would feel safe again. Not everyone experiences silence the same way. For some people, silence is neutral. For others, it feels full, like a pause that allows something unspoken to surface. But for many, silence feels like exposure. Without words to move the moment along, attention begins to wander inward. Am I being awkward? Did I say something wrong earlier? Is everyone else noticing this too? Silence invites questions people often prefer not to ask themselves. And so when someone steps in to fill it, the gesture can feel generous. The silence filler learned this early, though they would not have described it that way at the time. They simply noticed that rooms felt easier when someone spoke first. At school, during those moments when a teacher paused and no one volunteered an answer, they would raise their hand. Not because they were certain they were right, because the quiet felt heavier than the risk of being wrong. In conversations between friends, they asked the next question before the previous topic had completely faded. In meetings, they offered a comment when discussion stalled. Not insightful enough to dominate the room, just present enough to keep the current flowing. People described them as easy to talk to, friendly, engaging, the kind of person who made others feel comfortable quickly. And those descriptions were accurate. The silence filler did care about comfort. They cared about it so much, in fact, that they rarely paused long enough to notice what silence might reveal. Because silence does reveal things. It reveals hesitation. It reveals thoughts forming slowly rather than instantly. It reveals the difference between someone who has something to say and someone who is simply expected to say something. But silence also creates space, and space can feel dangerous if you are not used to standing inside it. One evening, the silence filler found themselves sitting with someone who did not rush to fill those spaces. The conversation had been pleasant, thoughtful even. But when the rhythm loosened, when the moment arrived where someone would normally bridge the gap with another sentence, the other person simply waited. Not in defiance, not to make a point. They just allowed the quiet to exist. The silence filler felt the familiar impulse rise almost immediately. A small observation formed in their mind, ready to be offered like a polite plate passed across the table. But something about the calmness of the other person slowed that motion. So instead of speaking, they waited too. At first it felt strange. The quiet was not long, only a few seconds, but without words to cushion it, the moment felt larger than usual. The room seemed more detailed. The sound of a chair shifting in the next room, the faint hum of the refrigerator, even the rhythm of their own breathing. And in that space, the silence filler noticed something they had never paid much attention to before. The silence was not empty. It was simply unoccupied by words. After a while, the other person spoke, but the sentence that arrived was different from the usual conversation filler. It was slower, more deliberate. "I've been thinking about something all week," they said, as if the thought had been waiting patiently for a quiet moment to appear. And the conversation that followed felt different too, less hurried, less decorative, more like something that had been allowed to arrive naturally rather than being placed quickly to avoid discomfort. Later that night, the silence filler walked home with a strange awareness lingering at the edges of their thoughts. They had not done anything wrong. They had not said too much. They had simply noticed something. The role they often played in conversations, the way their voice appeared almost automatically whenever quiet approached, and how, without meaning to, they might sometimes close a door that silence had just begun to open. The realization was not dramatic. It didn't arrive with embarrassment or regret. It arrived with curiosity. Had they been protecting other people from awkwardness, or protecting themselves from the uncertainty that silence sometimes brings? In the weeks that followed, they experimented gently, not by forcing themselves to stay silent, that would have felt artificial, but by waiting half a breath longer before speaking, just enough time to see what might happen if the moment wasn't immediately filled. Sometimes nothing happened. Someone else spoke. The conversation continued exactly as before. Sometimes the silence lingered longer than expected, and someone shifted uncomfortably before reaching for the next topic. And sometimes, unexpectedly, something deeper surfaced, a thought that seemed to need a little quiet before it could appear. The silence filler didn't stop talking. They didn't become a silent observer in every room. Their voice still appeared often. It was still warm, still welcoming, still part of what made conversations feel easy. But now, occasionally, they allowed silence to exist for a few seconds longer than before, just long enough to see what might grow there. Because silence, like many things people hurry past, has its own quiet function. It gives thoughts room to arrive. It lets emotions settle into words rather than rushing ahead of them. And sometimes it reveals that conversation isn't only built from speaking. It is also built from the moments when no one speaks at all, which leaves the question hanging, not inside the story, but outside it, with you. When a room grows quiet, do you feel comfortable or responsible for filling it? Do conversations deepen because of what we say, or because of the spaces between what we say? Is silence something to avoid, or something we simply forgot how to share?